Thank you for joining us at Webinars by Rockwell to discuss the 10 things that require zero talent. We will discuss the 10 attributes that the experts say have no talent required. Many of these items are common sense for some, but may be revelations for others. The first of our 10 things is being on time. How many times have you been early for a meeting only to have it delayed because one of the principals involved is late? You made sure to allow time for slow traffic, finding a parking space, and made sure you had your iPad, phone, or even a Padfolio to take notes if necessary, and grab your favorite beverage only to sit there for 10 or 15 minutes waiting for the meeting to start. You may hope the meeting will not run over because you need to be back to your office in an hour for your next meeting. You get more agitated by the minute and think of all the kinds of unkind things to say. You may even sort through your to-do list or think about what you could have gotten done. I worked for an employer for 15 years that was never on time for anything. He was 4 hours late to his first date with his wife. She managed to entertain herself in the bar and make friends and have a great time. When he arrived, she shook his hand and announced that she was leaving. It all turned out well in the end. They did get married, and even for their wedding, she told him the wedding was 2 hours earlier than it actually was, in hopes that he would be on time. And he was only a half an hour late. When I was first employed in his office, he routinely left clients waiting 45 minutes or longer while he was on the phone or was late getting back from lunch. Many times the client would leave or sit there and stew, getting more and more upset. The receptionist and I would take turns going to the waiting room and speaking to them, but of course it wasn't the same as him being on time. In the early days of the Dr. Phil show, he had a woman on that was habitually hours late for everything. When he called her arrogant and selfish, I was surprised that he would take that path. As he explained his thought, he said that she procrastinated because she thought they can't possibly start without me. And she had scenarios where she was kept in conversation for hours that she says she didn't want to be in, but seemed to manage to keep them going. She needed to be needed and given attention. So when she was late, everyone fawned over her, glad she was okay and that she hadn't been in an accident. After I thought about it for a while, I could see Dr. Phil's point about thinking people will wait for you because you are so important to the group. But to continually being late was a habit that she did need to break. The second item on our top 10 things is work ethic. How often do we lament because, as a cliche, the younger generation doesn't have the same work ethic as the older generation? It seems that each batch of graduating seniors are looking younger and younger. Each generation loses a little more of what their predecessors brought to the workplace. According to Steve Factor, the founder of the Idea Factory, there are several types of personalities. The alpha or the go-getter, the survivor who's always put out but keeps missing being laid off somehow. They are the manipulators who get promoted just to get them out of the department. Then there's the soldier, who's the worker bee. And of course, we always have the Bambi, who's the fresh recruit, fresh out of school with no experience. The believer, who's entrenched into the corporate culture, wears corporate logos, and has trophies for office picnics and photos on their desks. Then there's the pragmatist, who's the opposite of the believer. They are the skeptical, analytical, and idealistic. The naturals are ambitious and talented, but demand balance in their lives. They deliver results and earn loyalty and respect. They are born networkers and respond best when the corporate mission aligns with their own personal values. Some are visionary who can change the world. Others don't like rules and go rogue. The toiler represents the largest portion of any corporate population. They view work as necessary to get what matters to them most outside of work, like family, travel, or hobbies. They may be looking to conquer the world, but are essential to the success of any company. How often are you buried under piles of work that are all due yesterday and your coworkers are standing in the hallway or around the water cooler discussing the newest Hollywood scandal or last night's football game, taking a 2-hour lunch break, or leaving early on a consistent basis? Have you noticed that some people seem to get away with doing very little while you slave away tied to your desk for hours, not even taking lunch or bathroom breaks, just to get your project or report finished by the deadline? Of course, you take work home and sacrifice your downtime, your family time, your time to rest and rejuvenate, all in the name of what's good for the company. Please be very careful about being readily agreeable to sacrifice your personal time for the company, especially if you're an hourly employee and get no compensation for this time. Yes, you want to be seen as a team player. Yes, you want to further your company's business or cause. Yes, you want your boss to be able to rely on you. But be sure to put boundaries there so you aren't taken advantage of. Just because you do one project from home over a weekend to meet a tight deadline doesn't mean it should continue for the length of your employment. I've noticed that when you're hired and start a job at a certain level of care, skill, dedication, and responsibility, your supervisors always expect that same level or higher from you, no matter how good or how bad. Let that statement sink in for a few moments. What this means is that if Joe is hired and immediately exhibits traces of being a slacker, but he's well liked and squeaks out some decent work, it's likely that he'll stay on. On the flip side, if Susie is hired and is gung-ho, always prepared, meets or exceeds deadlines, then for some reason is no longer to continue in that same manner, she may be ill, going through a difficult breakup, or grieving the loss of someone she loves. She's more likely to have performance issues than Joe is. While this isn't fair treatment, it's probably something we've all seen at one time or another in our careers. It actually happened to me. In 2000, I went through a difficult breakup of a 22-year marriage. Over the next 5 years, I was continually harassed, beaten down, and had my children turned against me. In 2004, my ex became ill and spent several months in a coma in an ICU with hepatitis. In March of that next year, he suffered a double brain bleed and was brain dead. We had to make the decision to take him off life support. For the next month, I was a basket case. I may not have wanted to be married to him any longer, but I didn't want him to die, and I didn't want my children to suffer. 31 days after my husband's death, I was called into the conference room and was told they wanted my resignation. Their major complaint, the only one that really was work-related, was that we ran out of toner for an hour during tax season on a backup copier. Knowing full well that I'd never ordered office supplies in my entire life and had only been doing it for 2 months. Basically, the boss's son, Junior, had taken over for Senior, who had trained me, and he didn't like how I handled customer service. So since it was his desire that I no longer work for him, I demanded that he put on his big boy pants and actually fire me on his first day on the job. I'd done nothing wrong to warrant resigning. He'd been hired by his father about a year after I joined the firm, and as he worked his way up through the management chain, I stayed where I was. There was really no other place for me to go. There were originally only 7 people in the firm, but they saw me as a raw recruit who had not used a computer much before going to a 5-year sabbatical to raise my children. They saw me as someone to order around rather than partner or be a team member. At one point, I told them I didn't want to manage or supervise people, so when a job came available that I could have done a lot with, since I now had leadership experience in IAAP, they never asked me if I was interested. Our third thing on the list is effort. Everyone has their own unique sets of skills and talents. So if asked to stretch them and work on projects that is outside of your usual skill sets, you may not be able to succeed. You may have a moment of brilliance, but not be able to maintain that level or complete the project or task within the deadline. Your work ethic and efforts towards the project may keep you from getting a black mark against you as long as you make a strong effort and communicated your status so assistance can be given in order to meet the deadline. At one point in my career, I took 5 years off to stay home and raise my young children. They were 5 and 3 at the time and demanded a lot of time and energy. I even had another child during that time off. It was great to be home with the family. Life was much less complicated. We didn't need to worry about who was picking the baby up from the sitter or who was taking her to the doctor. I started cooking and baking from scratch. I babysat other children for a little extra money. I became the quintessential Kool-Aid mom in the neighborhood because we had a volleyball net and a swimming pool. Those are kid magnets. So when it became time to re-enter the workforce, I was way behind my peers. Much to my surprise, computer use had exploded with the creation of WordPerfect, Lotus, Harvard Graphics, and DBase 3 during that time. I knew nothing about these programs and had not used shorthand since leaving business school about 13 years before. This boss still dictated in person and on tape. So on my lunch break, I went to the local library and checked out a book on shorthand and signed up for a refresher course of typing office practice at the high school. I never said anything to the boss about this, but I must have mentioned it in passing to another staff member. Apparently word got to the boss about what I had done, and he told me it impressed him that I wanted to refresh my skills so I could do a good job for him. This was something I didn't even think very hard about. I just went and did. You see, I hate to feel like I don't know what I'm doing. I like to feel in control of my skills and that I can be of service. He appreciated my effort to better myself. Even if you make the effort and fail, at least you've made the effort. You will have learned something along the way, so the next time you will have a better chance to succeed. Do you ever look around and wonder to yourself, and maybe have even whispered to others, that if this person spent as much time working as he did avoiding work, how much they could get done in a day? I've seen this a lot in the last 40 years, and it never ceases to amaze me just how lazy some people are. My grandfather was one of these people. He was a carpenter by trade and had worked on the railroad and spent time as a school janitor. He had a very large shop behind the garage. He had every tool I could ever imagine, both new and old. At one point, he needed a new roof on their 1930s bungalow in Kansas. They get some harsh weather, from hot to cold, and it was time for a new roof. Instead of just doing the roof or asking friends to help, he spent 3 days figuring out a pulley system so he could do the roof by himself. As my grandparents aged, the hot weather started to bother them. They were both Kansas natives, and 105 degrees in the summer really was normal. But it was often 100 degrees by 9 a.m. My grandmother used to go work in the garden at 7 before it got hot. It was already 90 degrees. So my grandfather started thinking about this problem. The first thing he developed was a metal bracket with a wood panel on hinges. The device was installed on all the windows on the north side of the house because that's where the wind blew from front to back. The panel would be pushed against the bracket and force the air into the house. Those were the bedroom windows and the kitchen window. While the wind blew from front to back, the panel would go to the other side of the bracket and do the same. While this helped, it was still Kansas, and their wind wasn't coming off any hills like in New York State. Therefore, it wasn't cooler than the ambient temperature. So when my grandmother got her new Admiral side-by-side refrigerator freezer, the old unit, which was still functioning, was moved to the side of the house in the second living room window. He connected power and put a switch in the house. If it got too hot, they would turn on the compressor on that old fridge and cool off the living room. Our fourth thing is body language. Sometimes you don't think, and your thoughts and feelings are written all over your face and body, seen in a way you cross your arms or lean towards someone you're talking with. We often don't realize the silent messages we portray without even trying. People can tell if you're angry, and we all have telltale signs. Some people have a vein in their temple bulge, or their face gets red. When my boss is frustrated, she puts her face in her hands and often gets the deer in the headlights look when I can't remember something that's being discussed. Have you noticed that the crossed arm pose in photos now shows a confident and powerful business statement? I remember when that used to mean you were closed off, resistant to anything that was being said. And as a woman, didn't that just mean you were cold? Body language could be a whole seminar all by itself, but in the time allotted, we won't be able to get into much detail. So make the effort to read up on body language and see what your telltale characteristics mean to others. You may want to ask a trusted coworker how you are perceived and work on enhancing or changing it. Now let's talk about energy. We all know the world is full of those perky, energetic people who never seem to be tired and are always upbeat and positive and run circles around everyone else. On the flip side, there are always those who are low energy and seem to be slow moving, appear lazy, and unhappy. My mother seems to be low key. She was quiet and sat a lot. Looking back, I believe she was totally exhausted with 4 children and a full-time job in the 1960s. I now understand why she would ask me to do little things for her when I was a teenager, like get a glass of water. I'm sure her bones hurt, and she was tired after working at the factory all day and taking care of my ill father all evening. At the time, I didn't understand because I was comparing how I felt to how she acted. It wasn't a fair comparison, but I didn't know that at the time. Now that I'm in my 60s, I certainly do understand how much my feet hurt, my joints ache, and why I tend to stay put when I'm home. I do, however, try to portray a higher energy attitude at work. I try to keep my voice upbeat and my statements positive, even though sometimes it's a struggle. If you remember that character on Saturday Night Live, Debbie Downer, you don't want to be that person in the workplace. People will avoid you and shy away from working with you. Some people are very sarcastic or have a dry sense of humor. Just be sure, if you do this, that you don't overuse it at work. Sarcasm is one thing, but rude or hurtful comments are something you don't want to denigrate to. Our next item is attitude. Closely tied with energy is your attitude. You can be low energy and still have a can-do attitude. I've tried to keep that as an auto response when asked if something can be done. Yes, let me check into it, and I'll get back to you if there's a problem. I had a boss once who always said, I can teach skills, but I can't teach attitude. I've borrowed this statement more than once over the years, and it seems appropriate in many circumstances. Anyone can take a class and learn a new skill, but your attitude is the culmination of all your life's lessons. And while it can be changed or portrayed differently with learning behaviors and some effort, it tends to stay the same for your adult life unless you want it to change. Have you ever dealt with someone who always says no? This can't be done. I'd never do that. Instead, they should be saying, while I can't do it the way you describe, I can do this. While to turn the negative into a positive is always beneficial. That shows you can perceive a situation in another light and tell the other person what can be done rather than what can't be done. They will appreciate it. I worked with an HR director at one point who always says, we can't do whatever it was that was being asked. But after researching it, you found that you can, and it's not illegal. However, it will result in something else. Because we want to avoid the something else, we were not willing to do whatever it was being asked. She was perceived as not being a team player. The upper management tried going around her to get things done, and it ended up being a very difficult situation. I also heard that if you replace the word but with and, it totally changes the feeling, but not the context. Give it a try and see if attitudes change around you. Remember, only you can change your attitude, and it comes from within you and not your external circumstances. Our next thing is passion for what you do, your job, your family, your religion, your charities, your pets, and your hobbies are integral to your personality. They make up your character, and your passion shines through. Career-wise, I'm passionate about newsletters. I communicate and streamline procedures. That equates to I'm lazy and hate repetitive tasks, by the way. On the home front, I'm passionate about my dog, reading, and knitting. You can be passionate about more than one thing. You don't need to be laser focused on just one thing in your life. We saw in the last election that people were passionately for or against Donald Trump. This was the most debated and passionate showing for an election in many years. The passion has spilled over into spewing hateful statements on social media, violence in our city streets, and work and family discord. Passion can be good, or it can turn sour. We all know someone who collects something: flamingos, monkeys, antiques, whatever. They fill every space they inhabit, whether it's home, work, in the car, even on their clothes. Your boss wants you to be passionate about your job, to care so much that you will go out of your way for the job, to be conscientious enough to stay late and finish a project, or work on a Saturday to make sure the customer is satisfied, or to follow up with a vendor to make sure they received your order and the shipment is scheduled, or to double check your facts before you email things. Just be sure to strike the balance with work and home. Many of us sacrifice one for the other. We may feel we must sacrifice home for work. Depending on your boss, he or she may be agreeable to a slight delay because you have to take Johnny to his soccer game, but another boss may not. You'll need to determine which your boss is before you attempt to say no. Do not just assume they expect you to give up your family time or work projects. Try to establish a rapport with them. Share small details where they see that you have a family life. They will be less likely to shortchange your family time if they know about your kids, that they play in sports or dance or whatever it is. If you've seen the movie Elf with Will Ferrell and James Caan, there's a scene where Walter, James Caan, needs to give a pitch for a new children's book to his boss on Christmas Eve. He's sacrificing his family time to appease his boss. Buddy, Will Ferrell, interrupts his idea meeting and Walter throws him out. During the pitch, his son Michael comes in concerned because Buddy ran away. After some wavering, he tells the boss off and leaves to rescue his son Buddy. This was a great example of having no boundaries at work and spending all your time at or on work. I had a boss who worked almost every Saturday. He would call me at 9 a.m., usually while I was in the bathtub, to ask me where a file was or if I'd sent a letter out. It was seriously uncomfortable for me, but he had no idea what I was doing, thank goodness. I tried several measures to counteract his need to call me. I left him notes of where things were, put current jobs on his desk, made lists, but nothing seemed to work. I mentioned this in a conversation once, that I was in the bathtub when he called, and he stopped calling. Being coachable. This was a surprise to me that it was on the list, but it made sense after I thought about it. I've seen many people who are stubborn and close-minded in business. They only see one way to handle a situation, and it's their way or the way they handled it in another job 15 years ago. It can be difficult to deal with it if it's your boss, but when it's a colleague, it's another matter. I worked with a woman some years ago. She was my age, but had become jaded by life circumstances and her job experience. It had colored every aspect of her life, including her career, her family relationships, etc. She used sarcasm and insulting humor to get her point across, and if someone disagreed with her, look out, you were going to get an earful. She was incensed when her boss called her on the behavior. She didn't see it as a problem and couldn't understand why others didn't want to be told off all the time or told that they were stupid. She had learned to read people very well. That was a defense mechanism to protect herself from being in an abusive relationship. But she allowed that to follow her into the workplace, and she saw no reason not to share her view of the world, even if it differed from everyone around her. Unfortunately, she was let go during downsizing because her boss didn't want to deal with her. So when your boss or colleagues suggest a new or different way to do something, don't discount it right off. Be coachable enough to give it a fair shot. Doing extra. Now, when we see and hear this, you may automatically think that means working from home or being a yes person or creates visions of the bumbling PA running after her tornado boss while he shouts orders or questions at him or her. I think that rather than that, this means going the extra mile. For example, my boss got a notice on her phone that after-school activities were canceled due to weather. Her son was about 8 years old, and her sitter thought school was closed early. Rather than let her fumble while she's still trying to work and get ready for a meeting in 10 minutes, I took it upon myself to pull up the weather closings to see her school's district's announcement. It was a little thing that took a few seconds, but clarified her dilemma and put her mind at ease. And I got a thank you out of it. In the past, yes, I have made coffee, grabbed lunch, or sent flowers to the wife for my boss. I also went shopping at a nearby store for wedding and graduation gifts to his friends. You'll need to temper what you're doing with what would make your boss happy or feel special. I used to think that if I took care of my boss, when he would take care of our clients. After several years, though, I felt like I was babysitting a 55-year-old man. And he started blaming me when he missed lunch, or when he went home late, or when he got stuck on a lengthy phone call. He got dependent on me to do the little things, so he didn't have to. It's one thing to accept this assistance. It's another to expect it. I started to think of ways he could be more self-sufficient. I started writing up pending lists and sending him email updates on Friday afternoons so he wouldn't get that dreaded phone call on Saturday morning to ask me the status of a presentation or a letter. I would go over the client files on my desk so he knew where my work was. As time went on, and I worked for him for 15 years, I wrote most of his correspondence, I read and answered his emails, and I would copy his writing style. I also could sign his name better than he could. I began sharing with him my weekend plans, so he would think twice about calling when we had a play practice or a wedding to attend. Well, we often are asked questions about how much some project costs or to quote what would cost to complete a project. We find that our memory isn't reliable and need to verify our facts before sending off that email. Fact-checking before sharing the information is always preferable. You don't want to put your boss in the position where she has to go back and say she was wrong. That makes your boss lose credibility and erodes yours as well. I've said it before, this must be tempered with balance. Don't become so indispensable that the boss can't function in your absence. Keep your boss updated on pending projects and advise if deadlines will be missed. Tell them when you change a procedure and share updates with other departments. The more upfront and transparent you can be, the better working relationship you will have. Being prepared. As we talked about in being on time, being prepared is just as important. If you're on time but don't have your notepad or the agenda for the meeting with you, you'll be perceived as not prepared. If you are slated to be on the agenda, by all means be versed in what you are to speak about. If you're the committee chair and your event is coming up, bring your notes or give someone a status update. If you're supposed to share an update of your project, bring your Gantt chart and refresh your memory before the meeting so you can speak to the project intelligently. If you have regular staff meetings where the facilitator goes around the room for comments, questions, or updates, bring an idea with you every meeting to participate. Even if you aren't comfortable, after a while you will be. What better practice for public speaking? My current supervisor has what she calls leadership training meetings once a week. This meeting is generally 2 hours long and consists of budget reviews, project updates, personnel issues, reminders of other meetings, and various other subjects. The boss, the associate director, and the assistant director and I attend these meetings. I make sure I have my iPad fully charged and a blank Office 365 Word page on the screen, my drink, and possibly some tissues depending on what season, at my table in my preferred seat 5 minutes before the meeting is scheduled to start. And I make a quick trip to the ladies' room. If I have questions or need to share anything, that's also typed on my screen so I can refer to it when the opportunity arises. I take notes for only myself because they all take their own notes. When we started this meeting, I did take notes for everyone and share it, but it became redundant very quickly. I only write down action items and decisions made. That way we have a record of what and when the decisions are made if there's any question. I keep a printout of the action items until they're completed, and then they're tossed. The electronic copy is filed on a SharePoint site that we all can leverage, whether home or in the office. You'd be amazed how often we refer to these notes. If you cannot attend a meeting where you're supposed to give a report, don't just skip it. Write up a report and send it to the meeting facilitator so they can share it on your behalf. Being prepared is sometimes like taking a shot in the dark. Having things ready and not needing them can be frustrating for some, but I'd rather be safe than sorry. It's not as if I will never need the item I prepared. It just wasn't required for that meeting. In conclusion, I hope you've enjoyed this session of 10 things that require zero talent. I want to take issue with some of these statements. 10 things are all important, don't get me wrong, but organizing and arranging to cover all 10 of these things does take some talent or at least some skills. You may try and succeed, you may try and fail. Practice does make perfect, and the better you can anticipate your boss's needs, the more successful you will become. It doesn't happen overnight unless you're one of the 1% that immediately click. I've worked for my boss for more than 4 years, and we started working very well together after about 1 year and can sometimes finish each other's sentences. But it did take us a while before we clicked. So what do you all think? I would like you to add in the comments whether you think each of these items requires any talent or not, and put your reasonings there too. If you have any other thoughts, comments, or questions, please put them in the comment section. I would love to read them. Thank you for attending and participating. I hope you got a little something out of our time together. I'd like to thank my IT guy, Jaden Rockwell, for helping me with the videos. He stayed late to set up and monitor the system, and I appreciate his assistance. Again, many thanks for being here, and look forward to our next video. Bye for now.